Welcome to the Null channel. Today, we're covering the Kubernetes 126 release notes. I know it's been out for a little while, and these release notes are a little bit late. Just a little bit late. But we all love Kubernetes. We want to go over the release notes. Let's go over the release notes and see what the newest release of the world's most popular containerish scheduler is. As always, please let me know what your favorite features in this new release are in the comments. And if I missed anything that was super important to you and what is a really big deal to you, let me know in the comments. I can't cover every single thing as there were a lot of things released this release, but I do my best to cover the things that I find are going to be the most important to the general. But I always encourage you to read them yourself, and if you're having troubles sleeping, it's really a great sleep aid. This release really brings a lot of great things to things like improvements to high performance, think NUMA, as well as a bunch of deprecations, snapshot improvements, the CEL admission controller, all the way to things like stateful set improvements. So let's get into it and cover what I have found to be the most exciting things about this 126 Kubernetes release. As usual, we're going to start off with just a few stats about the release. I have to start with their new tracking document. It's just fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. I mean, check it out. No more Google Sheets, and here we come, GitHub tracking thing. To be honest, I did not know you could do this in GitHub. It's absolutely fantastic. Okay, but for real, last release was the only release where the number of enhancements I counted is the same as the ones everyone else counts. So I'm not sure if I've just been doing it wrong all along. Let's see if this holds true. Maybe I've just been doing it wrong, or maybe, just maybe, and this is what I'm gonna go with from now on, I'm the only real source of truth on how many enhancements were released in any given version of Kubernetes. That's right. I'm the source of truth on it. Now with that knowledge, you better go and like and subscribe if you really care about knowing exactly how many features are released in a Kubernetes release. As we all know now, I am the most reliable source of truth. Well, so let's start there. How many features were released? Sysdig reported 37 new features, while the tracking document listed 39. But if you remove the deprecation, which I did, you would be left with only 38. So I'm going with the number 38, which is a pretty good number. But this is down again just slightly from last release, which was 40, and that's down even further than almost a year ago with Kubernetes 124 with 47 enhancements. All right, so check out this graph. You can see all of the companies and users contributing, and here we can also see the contributions and the commits given to Kubernetes and track them over time. These charts are actually really cool. I'll leave a link to them in the description. So you know what? Let's just jump into the most visual release notes you have ever heard. We will start with deprecations. There's actually a pretty important one, but it's also not really important at the same time, unless if you're running Kubernetes on bare metal or run Kubernetes as a service. Kubernetes 126 will drop support for the V1 Alpha 2 of the CRI. The CRI is the Container Runtime Interface, meaning that when you upgrade to 126, you will need to ensure that your container runtime you are using supports V1 if you want to use 126 kubelet. Okay, but there are a few other things that were deprecated and removed. The V1 Beta 1 of the Flow Control API group has been removed. If you're using this, you will have to update to the V1 Beta 2. V2 Beta 2 of the Horizontal Pod Autoscaler has been removed, and you should be moving to the V2. I'm really excited about this. The V1 Horizontal Pod Autoscaler had some real issues, and the fact that the much improved V2 is released is actually a pretty big deal. You know what? Let me know if in the comments if you'd like a video on what it is and why V1 had the problems it did, and maybe a deep dive into the huge improvements that they have made to the autoscaler. But I'm going to need at least 5 comments asking for it for me to make that video. Another removal, one that you might actually understand if you watch my Where Are My Services video, is the removal of the kube proxy user space. Now, really, you should not have been using this. It's been deprecated well over a year now, and it's getting removed. That means you are going to need to either use the IP tables or the IPVS, which you really should be using anyhow. Okay, there are a few other deprecation and removals, but most of them I have already talked about in previous episodes of the release notes, like the removal of the dynamic kubelet configuration, as well as the deprecations for a few kubectl run command line arguments, though I can't really say any of them were used that much and is one of the reasons they were being removed. And sometimes I don't think they actually worked anyhow. Like the -- force flag, I'm not sure it actually did much of anything. Along with that, there are some klog flags that are also getting removed, though again, I don't know if any of these will have any real effect on anyone except people that are actually using klog as a library, so mostly Kubernetes developers. All right, let's go ahead and start with the most impactful net new features of 126. There were 23 net new features. Now, I'm not going to really talk that much about the Windows features. There were a few, and I'm sure they're very important to anyone running on Windows, like the ability to support privileged containers or the net new host network support for Windows pods. But I really will not talk about those too much, as I really don't do those things. And I'm really sorry if that's you. If it is you and you like these and would like me to cover them, I'm going to need a few comments down below letting me know so I can learn to dig into them and understand Windows containers a little bit better, because I really don't know Windows containers that well. I don't even know what a Windows container is. Anyhow, let's move on. Really quick warning, as I don't think I've made this clear, any net new feature we talk about is in alpha. These are not really ready to be used. At most, they're ready to be played around with and maybe used in some testing environments, but that's really it. These are more of things to keep your eyes on. In the second half of this, we will be covering the most important things released to GA, or maybe even beta and GA. Beta is when things are really starting to come along and are a little bit more stable, although maybe shouldn't be used in production. The first one that catches my eye is the dynamic resource allocation. This introduces a new API that lets you describe the resources a pod needs. This allows for dynamic allocation of these resources. So think about things like network attached resources, like storage or FPGAs. I mean, really, the sky's the limit. Now, this is the base work to support it in Kubernetes. You will also need to get a device plugin or driver to support whatever hardware it is that you want to dynamically mount. So not only do you need the Kubernetes portion that is released now, but you would also need your hardware vendor or device provider to also provide their end. But no real surprise here. In theory, it might not be too hard to write your own if it is something like network attached storage or something like this, if you needed it, and maybe some generic ones will come out in the future. All right, the next net new bleeding edge Kubernetes 126 feature, stateful sets, will now be able to control the start replica ordinal numbering. What does that even mean? Simply put, this is going to let you migrate stateful sets across namespaces, clusters, or really whatever you want, as you will be able to define the ordinal to start from. This is going to be a pretty powerful feature for people running databases or any other stateful application, because it's going to empower you to do a bunch of things like database migrations and other things like that. I think this is going to be huge for stateful applications. Let's talk about the next bleeding edge feature. Let's talk about CEL. I know we talked a little bit about it in 125, but let's talk about what it's doing for admission controllers this release. So I know that we all know admission controllers are the absolute worst. And even worse than making an admission controller and all the work to build and manage it, it also makes everything worse because it means that your request gets bounced around the network a bit as well. Now, CEL is going to let you do admissions really lightweight, and it's covering 90% of the use cases. This means that Kubernetes itself is going to be able to validate your manifest file without a admission controller, and it's going to make things a lot simpler for the majority of people. The admission controllers are still going to be there if you need to make a heavyweight one to do some really complicated logic, but those should be your last resort once this hits GA. Now, again, it's in alpha, so you can't use it just yet, but you should be keeping your eye on this and experimenting with it with Kind here soon. Another small net new feature here was the volume snapshot feature we talked about in 125. It gets a pretty big upgrade this release. So originally you could only restore it in the same namespace. I'm pretty sure I actually called that out in the last video. But with this, the volume snapshot upgrade, it's going to let you restore it across namespaces. I think this feature in conjunction with the stateful set ordinal numbering is actually possibly super powerful for stateful sets, especially when you're thinking about restoring a database or other stateful set. I do believe this could be really powerful. All right, one that I think will be really, really useful, but I think is prone to getting overlooked is the pod scheduling readiness. So right now, the scheduler just kind of goes for it, all Leroy Jenkins style, as soon as the pod is made. And the weird thing here is that this actually causes issues because it wastes a lot of time trying to schedule pods that it can't quite schedule yet. This feature adds a new scheduling pause label, and the scheduler can start to use this. This lets you let the scheduler know when it's actually ready to be scheduled. I have seen something like this in a custom scheduler before, and I think it's a pretty handy add. Also, now with this being on the default scheduler, it's going to be easier for everyone to use this on their own custom scheduler as it's a standard resource. So I think this is pretty cool, even if you're using a custom scheduler. Who here loves health checks? But who here loves health checks without structure? That's probably no one. That's who. Now, if you are one of those who likes structure, you can all rejoice as KEP 3466 is in alpha, causing structured data for modern agents, letting you create service level objects and alerts. Now, Kubernetes is going to export these out of metrics SLIS, but this does not cover creating all of the SLOs, so we can expect to see support rolling out through the components. But this is a really great step for some structured logging for metrics. Another big feature coming up for cluster administrators is going to be the self-subject attributes review API coming out of SIG-Auth. The KEP looks to make complicated authentication workflows just a little bit easier to reason about and to debug. This will now let people query user information and permissions inside of the cluster. And that's actually pretty fantastic because sometimes it could get really complicated and hard to debug. This is making things just a little bit simpler. And I love this out of mature projects when you can start tackling these hard problems and figuring them out. Good job, SIG-Auth. All right, last net new feature. And it might be a big deal if you're trying to run a lot of pods on a single instance. So for all of you trying to pack as many pods in a single machine as you can, this is for you. KEP 3386 is out there now and looks to make the performance of the kubelet better when checking on the state of a pod. That being said, I'm wondering if those who are really trying to pack as many pods as they can into a single machine will be the ones to benefit from this the most. I think this might be one of those things that gets overlooked by the majority of people, but could be really useful for that small group of people. I also think it could be really useful for the most consistent performance as well, as this is going to, ensure that the Kubernetes kubelet doesn't consume too much CPU itself. So I'm really excited about this. It's a great add. And that was really it for me for the net new features. Everything else from here is features that we have talked about previously, but have graduated to another level. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about the things that are not net new, but good progress has been made on them towards their journey to GA. The The first one I would like to talk about, and really congrats to the people working on it. The people working are just fantastic. The C-Advisor-less container and pod stats. Now you might be asking me why this is a big deal. Well, you really should like and subscribe and hit that bell button and go over these release notes with me, as you would have already known why this is a big deal if you watched my last release notes videos. So the C-Advisor is great. Absolutely love it, and it gathers all the metrics for you, like CPU and memory and everything that you need. Anyhow, this is moving to the container runtime interface, the CRI, the actual container runtime, and letting the CRI report it to Kubernetes. This lets the container runtime, that is managing the containers, manage the reporting and giving these a lot more flexibility. This gives a lot more flexibility for OS and platform to what metrics to return. Even think about this. If you're running VMs, it allows the thing reporting to the CRI to report things accurately. Whereas when it was C-Advisor, this wouldn't be possible. I also think that it has a pretty big implication towards Windows users as well. Although again, I don't really know Windows. Well, I know how to game on Windows. All right, let's move on. KEP 3329. As we have previously talked about, this is graduating to beta. This brings further stabilization to the work done with regards to retriable and non-retriable pod failures. We talked earlier in the last episode of this about how these non-retriable pod failures could actually save you a lot of computation, not retrying things that had expected failures. This is awesome, and while maybe not ready for prime time just yet, it looks like it's well on its way. We have further improvements to both the CPU manager and the multi-NUMA alignment manager. Though to be fair, while technically the multi-NUMA alignment in topology manager is considered net new this release, it's a lot of small improvements we've been covering that is bringing better NUMA support. This is just one improved alignment in the topology manager for NUMA. And now, basic support, we talked about it in 124, so you can go look there. There was also some release in 123 for NUMA memory pinning, and it's all really great, especially if you're in research and science, machine learning, and you're really doing high performance computing. This is fantastic. It's probably good to state here that, like the last video, there continues to be migrations to CS drivers from the in-tree to the out-of-tree provider. This affected vSphere and Azure this release, though I think most of them were migrated in 125. This is mostly just a reminder that between this and last release, you will need to ensure you have migrated your CSI drivers. Remember the job tracking without lingering pods that we talked about in 125? That's right. You don't remember, don't worry. Go watch my Kubernetes 125 release notes and then come back here. Anyhow, this feature has graduated to beta and now looks to be well on its way to becoming stable. As you all know, this work is a godsend for those heavily relying on jobs, making them so much more efficient. As we've talked about before, the new kubectl events replacing the old kubectl get events that looks to fix issues with the existing solution seems to be coming along quite well and is graduating to beta. This brings quite a bit more flexibility in the future for the command and should provide much better experience in the near future. So I'm quite excited for it. OpenAPI v3 for kubectl explain is now in alpha. OpenAPI v3 is just better in every way. Anyhow, in KEP 3515, it looks to update kubectl explain to use OpenAPI v3, giving visibility into things like nullable, default, and validation of fields. Really, kubectl explain now has OpenAPI v3 support and is one of my favorite kubectl commands. So any improvements to this is just awesome. I love kubectl explain. Go watch my video on kubectl if you're wondering what it is and how it can really improve your life. It's fantastic. Okay, so those really were all the big things that I saw in this last release. What do you think? Was there something you saw that you think is more important? Well, let me know in the comments. Otherwise, if you did not like this video, go ahead and like this video, stick around, and learn about things you obviously don't like. And have a fantastic day. the stateful sets will now be able to control the start replica ordinal. Stateful sets will now be able to control the start replica ordinal